I was planning to die. I had quit my role as the CEO. I raised a bunch of money and built some commercial buildings in the Midwest to try to provide for my family after I was dead. And you speak about that moment, but I remember clear as day a spark that said, Chase, if you're going to heal from this, you're going to heal yourself. Your health is up to you now. And at first, honestly, that felt just like a slap in the face because I was like, who am I to heal? Like, what am I going to do? I'm not a doctor. I'm not anything. How am I going to figure this out?
Before we get started, I want to tell a personal story about my mom and Lifeline screening. You may have heard me talk about my mom's peripheral arterial disease diagnosis about 5-10 years ago. And I wanted to let you guys know how we found out about it. She's not a doctory kind of girl, and she has white coat syndrome. So it was very challenging for us to get her tested for different cardiac issues. So I got a postcard in the mail about Lifeline screening, and I went ahead and contacted them and brought her to basically like a pop-up, which was at a church, a local church. And she went in, and it was very quick and easy. She didn't seem to be super nervous about it. There were a lot of people milling around, and they found the peripheral arterial disease, sent us a report. We went to the cardiologist, started using diet and nutrition and exercise therapy to treat it. And I've since gone to the Lifeline screenings myself, as well as my other family members, because it was super cost effective, keeping us from having to pay multiple copays and travel time and things like that. So Lifeline Screening is offering 5 preventive health screenings for a special price for my audience of $149. The package includes a carotid artery screening, abdominal aortic aneurysm screening, atrial fibrillation, which is also called AFib screening, peripheral arterial disease, PAD, which is what my mom was screened for, and osteoporosis screening. In addition, you can add other options like liver and kidney function and the A1C marker, which is for diabetes. So I can't encourage you enough to check it out. It's well worth it. It's going to save you a lot of time. It's painless. And you can click on my show notes in order to get the offer for $149, or you can call 844-558-0996 to schedule your appointment. That's 844-558-0996. Hello, everyone, and welcome to A Modern Healer's Journey. My name is Tammy Bennett, and I am your host. I am also a doctor of Oriental medicine practicing in Central Florida, and I'm very excited to have Chase Thornock on the show today. He is a podcaster. He's a coach. He is a survivor, and I'll let him talk about the fact that ballroom dancer to near-death experience. Tell me what happened.
Yeah, thank you, Tammy. I'm excited to be on the show with you today. I went from being a national champion ballroom dancer to being absolutely bedridden in a period of not very few months. And it didn't take me very long to get a diagnosis of an autoimmune disease, which I was grateful for, right? Sometimes it takes a lot longer for people to know what was going on. But I got really, really sick. And we ended up spending a lot of time in the hospital trying to figure out what was going on. And eventually got to the point where I couldn't eat anymore. And they said that they needed to do surgeries on me, but they couldn't because my blood was so poor, I would never survive the surgeries. So they gave me a feeding tube, which essentially they shoved down your nose. And the first one they put into my lung. That wasn't very fun. And then they ended up getting it where it needed to go. And they started these feeds, and it just sent me into shock. I would just shake, and I couldn't tolerate that. So eventually we had to do something called a PICC line, which was a line they put into your arm. You can still see some of the scars on my arms. That goes to your heart, and they feed you intravenously. And, that was kind of a stopgap measure to see if we could find some medications to help me with my condition. And I tried every drug imaginable for what I was dealing with. These were $10,000 and $20,000 a year kind of medications. And none of them were working. And so it got to the point where the doctor said, all we've got for you, we've got some steroids. You could take steroids the rest of your life, which will kill you in different ways. And we have opioids to help you with pain, but that's it. That's all we've got for you. So it was quite the shocking switch in my life to go from kind of being an athlete to being absolutely bedridden.
One of the things I wanted to ask you about was with regards to the medications that were tried. Did you try anything holistic initially at all? Was that even an option? Or was it truly just traditional medical that you went?
Yeah. So my condition was so poor initially that I was worried about dying. And so I felt like I didn't have time on my side. And so I mainly went traditional medicine. And then as things kind of stabilized out, I tried a few holistic things. I tried several holistic things, actually. I tried obviously some dietary changes. I tried something called the specific carbohydrate diet, which was based on this idea that if you don't eat complex sugars, the bacteria in your guts can't get a hold of them, and it will lead to better gut health and immune health. I went gluten-free. It basically was, I ate fruits and vegetables. That's what I tried to do, and some meats. And then, various things. By the end of all of it, I had a cabinet full of supplements that I was trying, and all of them seemed to help to some degree or another. It was hard to track exactly, and that was the one thing too, is that kind of going the mainstream medicine route, I wanted to know what was working and why, right? And so I was really focused on kind of isolating and saying, okay, I'm going to try like astaxanthin, for example, which is a really highly potent antioxidant. I'm going to try that and see if that works, right? But invariably, I'd kind of stop other things and I would do that, and it would help a little bit, but nothing was actually treating the underlying problem for me.
And prior to all of that, so ballroom dancing was something that you were doing. Was that your profession, or did you have a different profession?
No, I was actually a student at the time. And so the university where I went to, they have a huge ballroom dance program they are the best in the world. And so I was part of that touring team in school.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And professionally, after the ballroom dancing and after college, you were involved in some tech business. Is that right?
Yeah. So coming out of school, I was in venture capital, which for those of you who don't know, imagine like Shark Tank on TV, right? Obviously less whatever. But so I went into venture and pretty quickly was placed with a portfolio company that the venture capitalist had invested in. And within 3 years of joining that company, I became the CEO of, it was a fintech company, venture backed.
Gotcha. And with regards to the time that you were diagnosed and quite ill, how long was that duration to the point where you had that pivotal moment that you knew that you were going to take your life into your own hands? How long was that time?
Yeah, so it honestly was a period of about 8 years. So I suffered with that thing for a very long time. I remember my wife, my wonderful wife, giving birth to our youngest son, and 4 weeks after that, moving our entire family to California to try to find something to help me with what was going on in my body. And moving to California, this could fall in the holistic realm. We tried medical marijuana, right? We were trying to find something to help with these symptoms. And again, it was somewhat effective. As a matter of fact, it helped me to start eating again more. I was sleeping more and regaining some of my functions back. But it still wasn't it still wasn't kind of treating the problem. And so I was, like you mentioned, I was planning to die. I had quit my role as the CEO. I raised a bunch of money and built some commercial buildings in the Midwest to try to provide for my family after I was dead. And you speak about that moment, but I remember clear as day a spark that said, Chase, if you're going to heal from this, you're going to heal yourself. Your health is up to you now. And at first, honestly, that felt just like a slap in the face. Because I was like, who am I to heal? Like, what am I going to do? I'm not a doctor. I'm not anything. How am I going to figure this out? But when you're at that point, it's my firm belief that the right people, the right resources will show up in your life when you're just ready to do whatever it takes to get better.
And were you was it a dream that came to you? Did you just come to a realization? Did God speak to you? How did you know definitively that you were like, I'm done with this, I'm doing this?
Yeah, I wouldn't say, it wasn't a voice. I didn't see any angels or anything like that, right? But it was, I remember where I was actually. I was laying in my bed, which was a common experience for me. It was entirely dark. Um, and it was not only dark in the room, but I was really dark inside. One of those moments where you're just like praying to God, like, I don't know what to do here. And that impression was so forceful. It was something that I hadn't felt ever. And it was just that, right? Like, if you're really, you get a choice here, basically, right? You're either going to die from this thing or you will figure it out. Those are your two options. So looking back on it, I believe it was from God.
I've had other clients that have told me similarly that they've had an epiphany, not a voice, not a specific dream, but that it has to be within the body to heal the body. And so when you had that defining moment and you knew that it was going to be in your hands to do the research and do the work, what was the first thing that you did? Did you start scouring the internet? Did you go to the library? Did you call someone? How did that begin?
Yeah. Thank goodness my wife was far more in tune with these things than I was at that point. I was living from fear, right? Like just trying to survive this thing. And so she was probably the first resource. But essentially, what happened was I just decided that I was going to do what it took. Do you know what I mean? It wasn't like, okay, I want to try this one supplement or this one drug and see how I do, right? It was like, I'm going to change my entire life. And I think that was one thing that I had kind of come across and read about, was that people who had kind of extreme healing um, miracles, like whether it was from cancer or different things that they were dealing with, they ended up changing almost every aspect of their life, right? It was an entire shift. And then I also really wanted to know the science behind what was going on. And so I came across like Wim Hof, right? With if you're not familiar with the breathing and the cold exposures. And I really wanted to understand the physiology behind what was going on. And then more importantly, I did it, right? I just tried it. And it was similar to that voice of like, if you're going to heal, your body's going to heal itself. It was similar to that kind of impact. Doing the breath and doing the cold, I was like, oh, there's something here, right? Like there might be something to this. And then I had other people inserted into my life, other like a yoga therapist and even just a general therapist, right? As these people kind of came in and I started to glean this information, that's what kind of really started this journey. And then I was willing to do whatever it took to get better.
I had another guest on the show 6 months ago and then just recently, and she had a trauma situation where she lost the use of her lower limbs for a period of time. And I do ask the same question: what is the mechanism inside your brain that shifts at that time? Is it just grit and determination,
Hmm.
or is there something you can think of, or something you can say to others to motivate, stimulate, get them in that brain state?
Sure. I think for me and for a lot of other people, when you're suffering with a disease like that, you have lost a relationship. Okay. Your body is no longer your partner. It's no longer your friend. Maybe it never really was, right? But it definitely is not now. And even more so than that, your body's your enemy. Like this is the thing that's hurting you. This is the thing that's keeping you from your dreams. This is the, right? It's all of the problems that you're experiencing. And what I came to learn was that the trauma that I experienced in my life, when I was younger, my parents died, there are things that are going on. And let me just say the bar for trauma is not high. So if people are listening and they're like, well, I've never had that happen to me. Trauma is what happens to you inside of you because of what happens to you, right? And if you have a fight or flight experience and you're not able to process it, it can get locked in your body as trauma. But I had learned to disconnect and dissociate from myself, right? When anything reminded me of those traumatic experiences, whether cognitively or not, my body would go into fight or flight and I would disconnect from it. And eventually what happened is I became so good at disconnecting that I literally started severing the neuronic connections between my brain and my body, right? And these are more along the emotional pathways of your body, the via the vagal nerve. Obviously, if you disconnect the nerves between your brain and your legs don't work anymore, right? The
Right.
same thing can happen in the emotional processing centers of your body. So coming back to your question, the thing that changed was that I was willing to see myself. I always describe this experience coming to the end of this million-mile journey, just wanting to be released of this illness and finding the answer. And the answer was a mirror, right? Just staring at myself, knowing that the answer was inside of there. But in order to get to it, I had to reconnect everything. I literally was going to experience the hell that I had experienced and disconnected from, right? That was my only way of doing this. So when I say the thing that shifted, the thing that changed was a willingness to feel my crap, like a willingness to go into that space that was absolutely terrifying to me. And I just didn't realize it because I'd been disconnected from it for so long.
And did you, at that point, when you started getting some traction against the illness, right? Taking control of your body, was it the breathing or the cold plunging, or was there a combination of things? What got you to the point where you were like, okay, this might be really helping me?
Yeah. And we may jump into the physiology a little bit because I think it's helpful to understand what's going on. But when I started doing the breathing, when I started doing the cold, what was happening was in these breathing exercises, I was essentially shifting resources from my frontal lobe, right? The thing I saw as myself, to the deeper parts of my brain, to the more primal parts and the parts where the trauma was stored, right? So I'm shifting resources that direction. And that frontal lobe, which had become a protector to me, but also a barrier to any progress that I was making, started to soften, which essentially meant I started to wake up, right? Like I started to see the things that I was doing that was not cohesive to my health, right? Um, and then getting into the cold was an interesting experience because what it did was it forced presence, which was something I couldn't do before. And we all know the effects of an undisciplined mind, right? One where there's all this chatter going on. There's just always noise happening, right? Um, but when you step into the cold, you're not thinking about your report that you're doing. You're not thinking about something that you regretted 3 weeks ago. Like you are just very much there in that moment. So both of those combined started to create awareness, right? And when you think about it, choice only exists when you are aware, when you are awake, when you have the ability to make a decision. And so through that process of the breath and the cold, it started to soften the protectors, the things that had inhibited my growth. And I started to be able to see myself clearly. Okay. And then the next piece of it was that I began to understand that this maladaptive wiring needed to be replaced with something, right? That my illness, that I wasn't going to get well just because my illness went away, right? But my wellness that I was seeking needed to be created. It wasn't something that was just there when the illness wasn't. So those were the two first steps that really started making a difference. And then I really started to focus on the maladaptive condition triggers. Okay. So examples of this would be when I first got married. Okay. When I got married, I got really sick. Why did I get really sick? Right. Well, all of a sudden now I'm taking another person into my life to care for and to love, when in the past, many of those people had died, sometimes really horrible, tragic deaths. Okay. So naturally, my nervous system responded to that. It said, this is not safe for us. Okay. And all of a sudden, it set me into a heightened fight or flight state, which ends up leading to the inflammatory condition that I was dealing with.
When you first started doing cold, did you do it slowly or did you do it quickly?
Yeah, no. Well, I guess that depends how you're asking. I wasn't in the cold for a long time, right? But for a lot of people, it's a little bit easier to go all the way in. You know what I mean? As opposed to like really slowly going into the water. Um, but you're asking your body to do something that's hard, that's inherently stressful to it. I call it building the neurology of change. It gives you an analogy for dealing with the emotional trauma that you've experienced. It gives you a pathway because now you're doing something that you have full control over, but is very uncomfortable, right? Very loud. Um, and so it gives your brain an analogy that the next time it starts to worry about caring for someone that I love, right? I can connect into the discomfort that I feel with the cold. And that gives my brain a pathway to say, we can do this. We've done this before. We don't have to disconnect anymore. Instead, we can feel it.
Do you oftentimes find that clients that you see now, well, let me back up. 8 years goes by, you're starting different techniques to get well. How do you know that you're well? Are you going to the doctor and getting tested and you're saying, I'm well, or just the fact that you don't have a PICC line anymore, you're eating, you're healthy, you've gained weight? How do you know that you're well?
I'm glad that you asked that, Tammy, because that was my question too. I'm like, how do I know any of this stuff is working? Like, I feel something happening, but how do I know it's working? And there was a pivotal conversation that I had with, again, one of those people in my life. It was actually my father-in-law. But I remember I was in a pretty dang vulnerable state, right? I was, it'd been 8 years of this thing, you know? And there are people out there who have suffered much longer than that. But I remember talking to him and I said, how do I know that this is working? Because this hurts. Everything that I'm doing is hard. How do I know that this is working, right? And he said, well, actually, the way you know that it's working is because it does hurt, right? And that shifted my whole perspective. And that's one of the main tenets that I teach my clients, right? I'm like, I know that you come to me to feel better, right? But my job is to actually get you better at feeling worse, because it's the disconnection and dissociation from ourself, from the people that we love, from the community around us, that actually contributes to this dis-ease, this disease state that we deal with, right? And so the pain that at one point in my life had become an invitation to disconnect now became my beacon and now became my lighthouse, right? When those pains started to creep up, I could be aware, right? I'm aware. It's like the cold. I know that. I know what that is, right? I know that there's discomfort, and I moved towards it instead of running away from it. That's how I knew it was working. And then my body healing, that actually wasn't the primary goal. It started out as the primary goal, right? But then my goal shifted, because healing sometimes gives us this idea that we will feel good, right? But healing is actually not a process that feels good inherently, right? Like when you think about even just cutting your arm, okay, and that scab grows back and it starts itching like crazy, right? Like healing is not pleasant, okay. And so my brain shifted to finding the discomfort and going towards it.
And then there's a time where you decide, I want to teach other people.
Yeah.
I want to help other people. When you decided to do that, how did you get to that place where you were able to disseminate the information to other people? So it's one thing to, like for me, I do Chinese medicine. So I go to school, I take a test, I graduate, I open a door, I have a shingle with my name on it.
Yeah,
People
there's a
walk in the
pathway.
door.
Yeah.
Ding. Okay. So how do you get there? How does that happen for you?
I remember early on in this process, me having a frustration. I remember specifically listening to Wim Hof, right? And hearing him describe, I don't even know what he was talking about. And I still couldn't reiterate it, right? But this guy spoke in like these ethereal terms, and it drove me insane. Because I was like, I don't understand what you're talking about, man. Like, what are we talking about?
I
And so,
heard him on Russell Brand, and I
uh-huh.
said for the first time, and I said the same thing. I was like, wait a minute, he's here, he's here, but he's not here for me. Like
Right.
what is he really saying?
He's not left brain, he's not, it's not this logical kind of flow to the discussion. And so that part of me, first of all, it held me back to start, right? Because I wasn't willing to try anything that hadn't been tested or proven or whatever, right? But then it started to become my ally, because I was like, I want to know why this is working. I want to know a physiological process that happens when I do breath. And we can talk about that. I can talk about cold, right? So all of that stuff flew in to my I wanted to know scientifically what was going on. So that helped me a lot in being able to to now translate this verbally. But now that I've had all the experiences that I've had, I'm like, I totally get why they talk that way. Okay. I get why Wim talks that way. And I feel like a lot of my speech kind of goes that way now because I'm trying to describe with language something that you're experiencing in your body, right? And they are two disconnected pieces of your brain. It takes a long time for you to be able to transform it into language and then to be able to communicate it, which then has to go through the next person's filter before it finally reaches their brain, right? Communication is amazing that it even happens. And so imagine trying to explain what cold feels like to someone who's never experienced it.
Or
How are you going to
colors.
do that? Or colors, right?
Yeah.
And now I'm trying to explain to people the process that went on in my mind as my body was healing. What does it actually feel like to see the monkey brain not as you, but a part of you, right? What does it feel like to experience kind of an enlightened state where everything is present all at once? You know, like how do you even describe that in language? So, in other words, being able to articulate what's happening in the physiology has been useful, right? But ultimately, when I teach people, it doesn't matter how much they understand of the science. It just matters that they do it. Their body will understand. That's the whole point. Like I understood up here, Tammy, everything. I knew why I was dealing with some stuff, right? But actually getting that into your body is a totally different experience. It's like reading 1,000 textbooks on learning how to shoot a basketball. Just doesn't matter, right? You're going to be terrible at shooting the basketball until you get it in your body, until you build neuronic connections to be able to accomplish that task. It's called a tacit skill.
And when you become able to speak to someone about it and articulate what's happening, then you can heal other people, correct?
Well, ultimately, Tammy, what happens is that they feel something inside, whether they realize it or not, right? It's not really my words. Like it's almost our spirits and our souls talking, right? And that's what I tell people is that your body, when you learn this and when it becomes internal to you, you learn that your body is the only thing in this entire universe that's uniquely positioned to know what it needs, right? That just seems to make sense. Now, the question is, can it talk to you and can you hear it, right? Once those click into place, then it's all just a matter of being able to listen to your gut instincts, being able to listen to your inherent nature of your body being able to tell you exactly what it needs. So when working with people, people have asked me this question a lot. They're like, "How do you convince somebody to work with you?" I'm like, "I don't." Like, there's none of that that's going on because the person is at a point where they're awake. They've experienced enough pain and suffering that they're willing to make the changes that they need to make. And then when they hear truth and they hear the thing that's right for them, boom, right? It's right there. Now the next question is, do they have the courage to take the next step? And that's always up to them. It always was up to them. God told me nothing new when he said, your health's up to you now, Chase. It never was up to anyone else. It was always up to me. And the same is true with everybody on this planet.
What types of people come to you? What subsets of individuals come to you? Is there a group that tends to gravitate to you? Is there a group? Is it people that have had gut issues like Crohn's and colitis and they come to you? Is that the subset or is it vast?
No, it's fast. I've been astonished actually that many of my clientele are healthcare providers, doctors, nurse practitioners, people who are deeply immersed in that world and also very keenly recognize the limitations of what's going on. And I also speak the language, which I think is helpful, right? I can articulate the pathways, the theories by which some of these things could be helpful to them. In addition to that, I get a lot of CEOs, executives of businesses, high net worth individuals, and the majority of these people are pretty sick, right? But there's also a fair number of people too. The sickness is interesting because all the sickness does is it invites awareness, because these principles are true for everybody. Like this is how our bodies work. But if you're comfortable, and you're taking the pills and they're somewhat working for you or whatever, you're not going to wake up, right? Or it's a very hard process to kind of wake up and see your life. And so when I had that wake up moment, it's because I ran out of options. Okay. So when people run out of options, they look for help. Sometimes they don't. So the other spectrum, though, are people who are high performers and want to perform at a higher rate. Okay. So these techniques that I teach not only create wellness out of illness, right? But they also extend up the continuum and can create elite wellness from someone who's already normally pretty healthy.
Elite wellness. I like that. It's
Yeah,
got
it's
a nice
amazing.
ring. Yeah.
I mean, I using my techniques, I remember thinking, like, is this even possible? Do you know what horse stance is? It's
No.
where you like imagine like you're riding a horse, your legs are, you're kind of in a squat, right? And then you take the horse out and the standing like that, right? So you're supporting all your weight in kind of a half squat.
Gotcha.
Well, when I was doing that, um, I could do it for about 5 minutes or so, and then I couldn't handle it anymore, right? But then by day 7 of using my techniques, I was doing it for over an hour. I felt like this yoga master. I'm standing out there shirtless, it's snowing on me, and I'm in horse stance for over an hour. And I'm like, man, what I thought I knew about my body is not true. Right? I was thought, oh, I need more muscle mass. I need more whatever. I needed more connection.
Understood. Do you still suffer from any issues with your gut at all at this time?
No. I mean,
Okay.
it's probably too much information, but I used to bleed every time I went to the bathroom.
Yeah.
I used to not be able to eat for days at a time, and I have none of those issues anymore. As a matter of fact, I'm healthier now than I have ever been.
That's fantastic. I love to tell people about people like you because what I find as a healthcare provider is that if you take away hope that things could get better, it's empty. Everything becomes empty. The person is empty. The practitioner is empty. There's this, and I think doctors are sometimes guilty of this. I can't do anything else for you. That
Yeah.
that feeling. I've had clients that have come to me after hearing that, and I always know that there's hope and there's something, and that something. If I listen to what you said at all today, it's that spark that tells you I can do this, right? And that can be, like you said, a CEO or an athlete, an elite athlete, or someone who's at the bottom of a healthcare barrel and not knowing what to do. And I encourage people often to try to put themselves in that framework, but your work goes way beyond a word or a phrase that I can give to someone. So I want you to tell me when someone wants to engage with you. I know you have a website. We'll give the website in a minute. And I know you have a podcast. I've listened to your podcasts actually, and they're very informative. And I do really enjoy listening to people talk about their interpretation of what you do and the supplements that you advocate that people take, because I'm a huge fan of supplementation and working with
Mm-hmm.
people that way. So if a person wants to engage with you, the best way for them to contact you is to go to your website. Is that correct?
Yeah. Go to my
Okay.
website. It's whatmagnificence.com. And there's several ways to work with me, all the way from a simple online course. I guess I shouldn't say simple, it's 10 weeks, right? But
You know, I
the
don't think it's
work
simple.
that you do. But in terms of like a time commitment, really all we're talking about is like 20 minutes a day, so it's simple that way, but it's challenging, obviously, here to your neurology. And then all the way up to working for 6-month periods where I come out and work with you one-on-one, right? So there's lots of different options to go there, but whatmagnificence.com is the best place to find me.
And it's
Nailed
WHATMAGNIFICENCE.com,
it.
correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Because sometimes I always want to put an S in there.
I know. No.
It always messes with me.
Just come and see.
Yep. And then the podcast is also come and see. Sorry,
You're
I'm
good.
still trying to plug your podcast. And the podcast, if I remember correctly, I found it on. I have a podcast app, and it's on
Mm-hmm.
there. But are you also on Apple?
Yeah. I'm
Apple
on
Podcast.
Apple and Spotify and Google Podcasts and
Okay.
all the ones. And it's by
And
the same name. It's just What Magnificence.
what magnificence? Okay, because I was telling everybody magnificence with a capital IF in the middle, and I realized I was wrong. So I wanted to make sure I
No.
corrected.
Oh, you're right. It's not a capital I. Do you know what that's there for? I'm glad
No.
you saw it. So what I use is this idea. So you talked about hope, right? And
Yeah.
how important hope is. And the truth is that hope never is gone, right? It's just our belief that it doesn't exist anymore. But if you're alive, your body wants to heal, right? And so when we give up hope, we just give up our choice and we lay there, right? And let whatever happens to us happen to us. So I remember my grandpa, um, he had a very difficult life. And every time I call him, even now, and this is on the podcast, but when I call him and I say, Grandpa, how are you? Right? This guy can't walk. He's 90 something years old. He's a hay farmer still. He has that hope and that choice in his life. And I say, how are you, Grandpa? And he says, magnificent. And it's just like that. Right. And he means it every time. And that was one of those moments, one of those people where I was like, man, if he could have a life like that, could I? What if I could? Right. And so the whole point of that capital if is that you can use the power of what if. Maybe you can't get to, I'm going to get healed or I'm going to whatever. Right. But all you have to
Right.
get to is what if, because there's your hope. What if you could be better? What if your life could make a change for the better? Because the truth is that it always can.
Yeah. Uh, no better words to end our session. I loved having you on. I would love to have you come back again and talk about some case studies. And I would encourage everybody to check out your website for sure.
Thank you, Tammy. It's been a blast. I've loved it.
Thank you. I appreciate it.